Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies Confidently Uncertain, a show with two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers talk veteran issues, science, geopolitics, engineering, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
Good to talk to you, Pearson. You're coming in live from the Pacific Northwest Center for Juicing. I've been doing a lot of vegetable juicing to increase my health.
Not to be confused with steroids, correct?
Not to be confused with steroids.
Yeah, as you can see over here. Well, that's good. That's the healthy type of juicing, I think, the one that you've chosen. So wise choice. Today, we're going to be getting into episode 28. Wow, we've done 28 of these things already. Amazing. And instead of good news today, it's been like 2 weeks since me and Richard talked. You wouldn't know this because you're probably going to be getting episode 27 premiering tomorrow. But this sentence and this conversation will be coming out a week after you saw episode 27. So technically we are talking to you from the future, which is cool in a way, but also from the past. Actually, no, we're talking about the future from, anyways, it could get really weird here. How have you been? How's the school year shaking out this year? You're right in the middle of it now. In this term.
Great. For the first time in 12 years, I've actually got a lot of traction with both engineering departments' capstone classes. And so usually I don't get a chance to talk to the electrical engineering majors and present that I can assist them with, design and implementation of their projects.
Yes.
This year, that totally happened. And I'm working with multiple groups from our department. When I say our, Pearson and I would be in the electrical engineering department together.
Yeah.
And this is a really terrific development because it means that, well, one, my favorite thing to do at work is to work with our seniors in the engineering programs. Love it. And two, it means that those things that make it difficult to complete a capstone project are the things that I can spot easily and tell them.
Yeah.
Whereas generally what happens is we just blunder our way until May and then panic and get something turned in for grade. And the capstone is never quite as nice as it might ideally be. And so I really love to be in that project consultant, project manager position for all these different activities going on.
Yeah, God, it's funny. I do fantasize about the ability to help craft capstone projects now being in engineering consulting, at least, in one leg of where you can go as an engineer, living in the consulting world. I'm like, oh my God, there would be cool to merge like a design type of capstone, like a feasibility study through a design element of a capstone, I think would be really beneficial to a lot of engineers. It'd be a really good pathway, right? That would get people ready for the job that they're going into. Because a lot of engineers, I think capstone naturally lends itself, and it absolutely should, because it's the fun stuff, towards the R&D side of engineering, right? Like trying to invent something and trying to create something. And this is where a lot of inventions do start, period, is at university. I mean, it's one of the biggest benefits to university is that's where you get to try out new ideas. Because the honest fact of the matter that in the industry, in the world out here where you're having to engineer for a living as opposed to engineer for education, the benefits for people who are looking to R&D are a lot more specific, I would say, and very small part of the industry a lot of times. These and a lot of this stuff, even studies will happen at like national labs, which we've talked about recently. Those are the kind of types of places where you might see experiments being ran and things like that. And at a consulting firm, we do have R&D, we do have innovation centers, we do invent things or create things here and there, but it's definitely, I would say it's a very small subsect of what we do. And so I would be very interested in crafting a couple capstones that were merged business and engineering a little bit closer. Just as an option, right? Like, I think it would be like a pathway that some people will choose, but maybe that'll be for some future adjunct professor who's business minded to get involved with or something. One of my colleagues is actually looking to teach at OIT right now. He's a substation engineer, and he's expressed interest in teaching the junior power series, or I think it's a 300 level class. Yeah. So anyways, we'll see how that goes. Uh,
If offline, we could attend to contacts and networking on that if you'd like.
yeah, yeah. I think right now I'm going through a different Mr. Billy, as you know, has put me
Yes.
in head with one of the department heads for EEREE. So now it's a matter of the guy on my side. When I told him, "Hey, we can set up a meeting," he's like, "Oh, I'm so swamped. I don't know if I can teach it now." And I'm like, "All right, well, we'll find it. We'll work it out." But yeah,
Yeah.
so
The best thing to do is to be in the pipeline, to be sort of in the queue,
yeah,
because what always happens at this little one-room schoolhouse is that the department chairs tend to get some people lined up to teach. And then if something happens to any one of those faculty, oh, I don't know, like a medical emergency happens at the beginning of the term,
yeah,
then we lose the class.
yes, yeah.
And sometimes we lose the class that we offer once a year and is a mandatory class for that program for people to graduate. And now what do we have? We have a
Or
total
yeah, or it's a
smoking ash pile.
prerequisite, right? It's a
Yeah, totally.
prerequisite to a senior class that they have, and
Yeah.
they could set their whole. Yeah, exactly, absolutely. Um, no, I think that's a good idea. Well, that's cool. I thought the capstone program I always think is a really is a very extremely um, useful portion of the degree process. A lot of times in engineering is specifically, this is talked about, that a lot of times your degree, the information you're learning doesn't translate well into the job, and that maybe you're
Yeah.
only utilizing roughly 3% of the information that you've learned. And to a degree, I can, on substance, sometimes I can agree with that when it comes down to, like, various thermodynamics classes or fluid dynamics. I'm not exactly doing a lot of that stuff, but you almost are learning all this information to have it rattling around in the back of your head in a way so that
Mhm.
when you see something that is breaking the laws of physics, it's breaking the laws of physics. And it's simply, that's the kind of knowledge that you're learning there, I think, sometimes. But um,
I sat down with one of the seniors in the mechanical department, and I had proposed this earlier. I said, "So, do you know how to use Microsoft Word?" And he goes, "Yeah, everybody does." I said, "No, no. Do you know how to use global formatting? Do you know how to automate these different features?" And he goes, "I've never heard of that in my life."
oh my God.
So,
By the way, this is a reminder for offline conversation on Word because you are a word wizard. I'm I had to make a custom. For one of my reports, I had to make a custom set of headers, right?
yeah,
And I finally figured out how to change the level on my header, the outline level, so that I could get that
okay,
extra 0.1 that I wanted
yeah.
on this one outline, but it's not working. And so offline, I might need your help because and by the way, it was hard to get that level to go from ungray in the text box for me to be able to actually change it. There was some little finagling I had to do
Yeah.
in Word. So I thought I was onto something. And then when I changed everything and got it to the way I wanted, it didn't change in my format settings. So anyways, this is a reminder
Well,
that we're using.
the reason I bring it up is because when you mentioned having some concepts of thermodynamics in the back of your mind and some concepts of electrical engineering and electronics design, these are all not that I want to call it all busy work for 4 or 5 years or however long your degree takes. It is actually useful information. It is not just interesting, but it's interesting how it came to be, how we came to understand this, and how universally transferable the concepts of force and electromotive force are interrelated. Like they
Yes.
have basically the same elements built into them, and these ideas of how you can kind of solve problems if you just understand the units and dimensional analysis. But the thing that, and you've mentioned this, one of the things that it turns out is incredibly useful to the engineering major in their career is, of course, document preparation, document translation, taking the specifications, turning those into maybe a presentation, maybe a report, and maybe a pamphlet.
Yeah.
And the thing that we still really struggle with actually teaching is just that, because our students go through these writing classes and they're long report writing classes, but they're not always classes that teach us how to, one, use the software, and two, write as though it was an integrated tool into the project, as opposed to a thing that's being layered on top. And so that's one of the things I love with Capstone is teaching that.
Yes, and I always sing praises. One of my, I think, the most important engineering classes that you take is a prerequisite, which is advanced technical writing and technical writing, and then advanced technical writing.
Yep.
Both of those courses, and I could feel how important they were, because I was starting to get an idea that
Yeah.
I was starting to get keyed into the fact that writing might be one of the most important skills I'm going to need as an engineer, more so than even my mathematical ability. Um,
Yep.
Thank God, because I'm like a mid-level math engineer as far as engineers go. And you know what I mean when I say that, Richard. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of engineers in mathematics who have mathematics degrees before they go into engineering, when they realize it's tough to make money in mathematics on its own. But
Right.
with an engineering degree, that mathematics really pays off, and those students typically do really well in all of those physics classes we're talking about, all that busy work.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good at that. But yeah, writing really, and technical writing specifically, those type of courses, really understanding how to use Microsoft Word is just so fundamental. And knowing how to craft really good emails to the audience that you're supposed to be crafting it to, whether it's to clients, whether it's to your colleagues, to vendors, to your superiors, to whoever you're talking to. These are different written documents. They're not written the same.
Yeah.
And that nuance there, it's sometimes tough to navigate, I think, especially when you're like emailing your boss or your boss's boss or your boss's boss, somebody in the East Division C-suite, and you're like, hey, I got to email this guy something. It's just it's a simple email, but suddenly I'm very nervous. It's like, well, what level of formality do I need to have for that? I've never talked to this person before. Do I need to be playful in the intro? Like, hi, nice to meet you. Or should it be all strict business? These are the conversations you start to have when you're just to craft like even a simple one line, like, hey, are you available to talk this week? Anyways.
Yeah. This is where the writing of an email is an art unto itself, in that ideally you address a single issue, or maybe as many as three, but laid out as single separate issues, and there's a lot of white space.
Not in my industry. Those are not the emails that happen here. I can tell you right now, that is the only. Okay, so those emails only occur between colleagues, between other colleagues within my company. Emails to vendors or clients a lot of times are boom, 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 boom. Like, here's a bullet points of a bunch of issues that we came up, a bunch of questions have come up. And then they will follow with like either a different text response to all your bullet points, right? Well, they'll reply all, they'll send it back, and you'll get answers. And a lot of times that's the type of text you're getting, especially to clients and both to vendors, right? Because we'll be talking to a hydro turbine vendor, and they're like, hey, I'm seeing a max capacity head of this. We've got some questions about that. What are they going to do to balance the load? What are you guys considering? Do you have a preference for horizontal versus vertical turbines? What's the minimum capacity? Because that's going to affect which. So they'll have a whole bunch of questions to ask us. We answer a bunch of them, and vice versa. So a lot of times, that the single line email, I do miss a little bit, but it's definitely inter-colleague for us.
Well, the audience might think that you did a no but actually you did a yes and, which is, let me flesh it out a little bit, which is the quality of email that gets the most traction in academia is a very simple one with a lot of white space, and it's usually one thing that you're addressing. Now, that said, when you know when you and the respondent or the person receiving the email have communicated a couple times, and they can handle more than one single concept, then it's exactly what you said. It's salutations, whatever that is, very brief, and then here are the 5, 6, 9 bullet points, and you lay it out so they can answer them separately. And it's not geared like a survey so that you're trying to get a different answer from each. No, try to get the same answer by asking the same question 5 different ways. No, it's not that.
No,
No.
it's definitely a relationship building for sure, because a lot of
Mhm.
times I don't send the flurry of 5 bullet points of text until the client has sent something like that to me,
Yes.
and then I'm like, oh,
Yes.
so now it's allowed. I can send it back.
Yeah.
They've opened
Yeah,
up this
totally.
new layer of email sophistication. Yes. Anyways,
I,
um,
I interact with faculty and lawyers that refuse to answer more than one question per transmission.
lawyers, yes, they hate bullet point. Yeah, they hate the bullet point emails. I've had to talk to legal at our company, and yeah, they would abhor that, even if I had multiple legal questions for them about
Hmm.
whether or not we're going to get sued for something. Um, anyways, so well, that's a good update. I think yeah. So capstones are writing, and I think we're going to jump right into it. So last week, I'll start us off. We talked about the Department of Energy and labor statistics that
Yep.
were coming out with
Yep.
the really strong labor statistics around the Department of Energy, specifically
Hmm.
for um, minorities and veterans. Latino minorities and veterans were crushing the labor market in the energy sector more than anybody else. But in general, energy sector had the best job growth out of all the job growth in the country over the last 4 years, essentially. In a large part due to things like the Inflation Reduction Act and
Hmm.
the CHIPS Act. So, and I am part of that statistic, which we talked about. And then we talked about the rise of labor unions in during the 1930s,
Hmm.
and the New Deal, and kind of all these different initiatives, and probably the healthy parts of populism, right? Like the internal fixing parts and infrastructure from within sides
Hmm.
of populism. So we talked a lot about that. Um, and what else did we talk about, Richard?
Well, we've sort of planted our flag in the general vicinity of the 1930s, and in a somewhat um, painting with all the colors at once way of looking at the United States and what was happening externally.
Yeah.
So to the audience, we're dabbling in present times with the IR, what we're calling the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. We're dabbling with some statistics about modern employment and where the workforce is going. But what we're one of the things that we're trying to do primarily is draw some comparisons about this historic period of the 1930s and how the simultaneous problems that were presented to politicians and to voters were that, one, as a consequence of some pretty flawed legislation and fiscal policy in the 1920s, and and not the depression specifically, not the capital D depression, but the little financial crises that took place immediately following World War One. As a
Mm.
consequence of that, we get the Great Capital D Depression. One, two, we get this inward focus on our own problems because we're literally experiencing a crisis to the point of fatality from starvation and other privations due to the financial crisis.
Yeah.
And and finally, we're sort of getting to, it's not the end of the robber baron age, but we've kind of attacked all these different approaches to monopolies and other um, extortion and exploitation by business of the working public. Outside of the United States, we have these crises happening where we're pulling back our policies and not engaging in a global trade fashion. And that creates a series of problems that come back to haunt us in 1941.
Yeah. Um, a couple things that I'd like to lay out to explain kind of the tone of the time at the end of the 1920s into the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I listened to this really great series, Behind the Bastards, who's doing a special right now on the fascist governor of America, the most fascist governor of America, and his name was Eugene Fardam. Have you heard of this guy? He's a Georgian governor.
Geez, that sounds familiar, and yet I tell me more.
Yeah, so he was a true fascist. He's a really interesting character. And Georgia really, the Georgian citizens really loved him, and this was during the 1920s. It through the Dust Bowl, so his population changed from being majority farmers while he was governor to becoming more in the city, in the rural areas of the city and stuff, and stopped being
Yeah.
farmers. Right, like this transition happened while he was governor. He kept getting voted in because he talked about the old ways with the farms and stuff, while and
Hmm.
like being for the farmers and everything else, while at the same time turning away federal stimulus from FDR constantly. Anyway, fighting farmer stimulus and all the things that FDR was doing. Now, at the time, Georgia was voting for FDR, but they also voted for Eugene because, and when they were polled about that, they said, well, we know that FDR is out there fighting for us. And, but they felt guilty because they had left the farm, but this guy was still fighting for the farmer. That's what he represented. And so they
Yeah.
still voted for him because he was fighting for the farmer, even though he really wasn't. He was doing nothing. He was like, he was using government funds to set, when he was the head of the Department of Agriculture in Georgia before this, of course, very powerful position for a farm country, farm state like Georgia. And he was using funds to send his family to botanical gardens for research for agriculture, or sending to the county fairs to look at horses and livestock for research for agriculture. He was completely corrupt. He had taken the position from someone else who was corrupt, by the way, and talked about how corrupt he had been. But he was friends with Jack White, who was friends with the FDR. Jack White was a millionaire who had become very rich from creating road infrastructure, and he was a big construction guy. And he was friends with Eugene as well. He had become rich in Georgia from knowing Eugene. You know, they had scratched each other's back or whatever. And they used to all, while FDR was president, they would all go and have vacation. Their families would have vacation together at, you know, wherever aristocrats go to do that, some lake or something. And Jack White and Eugene were just like, and it's 1936 or something. FDR's been president for some time now, and they're like,
From 4 years, he was elected in 32.
yeah, so
started in 32.
32. So he'd been there for 4 years, and he'd been spending like crazy, right? And the unemployment had gone down, but it hadn't gone down a lot. It'd gone from like 19%, you know, like 20 something percent to like 19%. It'd gone down about 5%. And Jack White and Eugene are like, what are you going to, you can't spend us out of this depression, right? Like, what are you going to do? Like, and FDR just says, Jack, Eugene, people like you and you have ruined this country. I have to spend money to fix it. It's you guys are the people to blame. It's people like you. And he like said that straight to their face. And this is just an interesting.
But FDR had polio. He's sitting. He's so while saying this.
So did Jack. So did Eugene when he was a kid. He had a club foot. He had a club foot.
Level playing field.
Yeah, level playing field. He had a club foot. He was kind of a weakling kind of guy, like a reed of a man, to be honest. Anyways, fascinating stuff in history. But this is just to paint a picture of what the time was like. And people were very, you know, FDR had a lot of people who were against him. FDR was Machiavellian. He didn't tell his cabinet much because he thought most of the people on the cabinet were idiots. He wasn't wrong. Most of them were idiots, actually. He did have a dumb cabinet, but he made it that way on purpose. He thought he knew better than most of them. In this case, he kind of did. So this was what it was like back then. It was absolutely crazy. We've covered the labor unions and all this stuff. We talked about World War II also.
We keep dancing around the edges of it, and you know what we're not going to do is talk about comparing different airplane models and talking about specific torpedo models that were failing in the Pacific. No, I think that is not really in the context of what we want to get to. The exciting, flashy stuff that you could see on the History Channel is not what we're going to talk about with World War II.
Yeah, I think we could sum it up in 5 minutes pretty easily with a couple questions. Yeah. Richard, how would you say World War II really started? That'll be the first question. I think that's a good one.
All right. So It is a series of incidents that led up to Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939. And that series of incidents we now reflect on and call appeasement. And so these were sort of negotiations between Great Britain and Germany,
Hmm.
the Nazi regime in Germany in the 1930s. Once Germany invaded Poland, much like when we talk about how World War I started, there was a powder keg, and then there was an ignition, and that ignition was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Duchess Sophie. In World War II, the analogy is Poland. Because of the alliance between Great Britain and Poland, now Great Britain and Germany had to go to war. And so,
I'm curious, had Germany
yeah.
invaded Czechoslovakia before that yet? Had they
Oh,
gone into
yeah.
the Czech Republic?
Good question.
Everyone kind of
So-
glosses over that, but I always forget if it happened before, because I remember they invaded France in 1941.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was the Anschluss with Austria, and then there was the
That Austria
Sudetenland-
just let Germany have it, basically, right?
Well-
I mean, like, because they had to.
they didn't have any other choice.
Yeah, they were like, I guess we're Germany now. Here,
So we doing swastikas now. I see what's happening. Yeah, that's kind of what it was.
Yeah.
So there was a fascist movement in Austria that undermined their parliamentary system.
Yeah.
Austria had only been a country that was a country, not Austro-Hungarian Empire, for a couple of decades, or not even that.
Yeah, just like a decade. Yeah.
And so Austria was not really in any position to negotiate with a hegemon like Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And so they just said, and there's a story about the prime minister, essentially, I don't think he died from this, but was hospitalized as a consequence of the heart issues he had.
Yeah.
Because the Germans are just saying, basically, we can do this hard or easy.
Yeah.
And so they did it easy. And there you go. Now Austria is subsumed into the German Empire, the Third Reich.
Yeah.
And then the Sudetenland in the Czech Republic is this other part of that. The thing I want to remind the audience, and the reason why sometimes when we get into this comparison of modern politicians with past politicians, part of the reason that Adolf Hitler was capable of doing these things is that he designed every interaction with another state leader or another diplomat or whatever. In every negotiation, he designed this around their eventual betrayal of him. So he would set things up so they had to betray him at some point. And it's very clever. Each time is a little bit different. And essentially the same thing is true about when he invaded Russia, the Soviet Union invaded Russia, because he designed that interaction so that the Soviets could betray him. And by betray, I mean blunder into a situation that they couldn't have avoided.
And Goebbels helped a lot with this. So Joseph Goebbels, I mean, like, Hitler is the man, for sure. But Joseph Goebbels is equally as responsible for most of what the Nazis were doing. This guy was one of the premier lieutenants, and he was a true believer. He believed in Hitler beyond when Hitler believed in Hitler, to be honest. Hitler gave up on himself, and then Goebbels gave up on Hitler once Hitler had killed himself, frankly. Goebbels, if you guys don't know, that Joseph Goebbels is famous for killing himself, killing his wife and all of his children, and then himself after Hitler had killed himself.
This is in the bunker in Berlin.
Yes. He gave all of his children cyanide poisoning. It's a very horrific story. I listened to
there was no retirement plan for them. They saw no way out of this. Anything that happened to them, but anything that happened when the Soviets invaded Berlin was going to be dire in format and punishment. So it sounds really extreme that they would do that, and he's not a prince, and this is not a angelic figure.
But
also there was no retirement plan.
Well, and there was this weird thruple situation happening as well between his wife and
Yeah.
Hitler. Hitler had been sleeping with Goebbels' wife for like a long time as well, but Goebbels was in love with Hitler. Like he
Yeah.
loved Hitler. He had
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know if it was even sexual or just like it was like cultish belief of love. Who knows? Who's to know? But there was definitely an obsession there and some weird shit happening. But yeah, overall, yeah, there
Understood.
wasn't really an exit plan, and they were true
Yeah.
believers as well. I mean, they were all,
Totally.
um, yeah. I listened to his secretary testified in front of Congress like a couple of years ago. She was like 97.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's like they were nice people, a nice family. She just, she was like super matter of fact, didn't look at him as like she's like it was sad when she lost some of her Jewish friends, but she like was well what, it was a good job, That's how she talked
Yeah.
about it. It's just
What are you going to do?
yeah, that's literally how she talked about it. It's like, what are you going to
The
do?
Nazis brought a form of stability to Germany that the Weimar Republic failed to do, and the Nazis capitalized on that failure.
Yeah.
And so anyone who was benefiting from the regime of the Third Reich is complicit in all of their evil, but it was a banal form of evil for them. Is they were, how do we even put this? In our modern time, it's really hard for us to connect with the privation and austerity of Germany following the First World War. It is there's just not an analog for us. We have forgotten the austerity and privation of our Great Depression, which is very similar.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about this, the people that can't get their minds around how the Nazis at the high command could be liked or appreciated or considered like, oh, they were just fine. We were just having a nice time running this country. While we can't get our mind around that, we also can't get our mind around what came before it. There was a prerequisite situation that got them there.
Well, and
Also,
when you're
the
doing
other side of this is
go ahead, sorry.
there's people that look at this regime and look at what they were doing and think, oh, we could probably continue this. And also, I can't get my mind around that because there is no prerequisite to that. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's just pure evil.
That's wild. I mean, and one of the things, I mean, because the Nazis were doing such horrific shit, it's hard to think of them as to humanize them.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed when I was doing a lot of research on this, Goebbels was a weak man, by the way. He was physically frail and a weak man. I think he had a lot of health problems when he was a child. Very smart though, extreme, like, brilliantly smart man, ruthlessly brilliant.
Yeah.
And one of the things that him and Hitler really honed in on and the Nazis were big on was the idea of macho hard men. It was about being hard enough to do the right thing, to do the hard thing, right? And so there's stories of Nazis mowing down civilians, Jews and all types of people that were innocent. They're mowing them down with tears running down their eyes. These men were crying. They were human men crying, doing atrocious things. That was okay in the eyes of the Nazi army, as long as they were hard enough to do what he needed to do, what needed to be done. It was okay that he expressed the emotion during it. And there's all these different accounts of this happening and stuff of men being emotional while they did horrific, inhumane things to other human people. And this constant messaging of being the hard men to do the right thing. It was really the Nazis did what Mussolini had wanted to do so much, was to tie self to nation in a way such that you would completely abandon any moral hesitancy you had. And the Nazis did it. They really did it. And through Goebbels' propaganda, really. And Goebbels was able to manipulate propaganda in a way he fed off of anger and hatred when he needed to. And then he crafted Hitler into a message of hope, because Hitler was looked at as this angry guy for a while, right? And then Goebbels was the one who kind of had to recreate Hitler as this guy who was a hope and savior to the the German party. And then once he had done that, it went back to fear mongering again, of course, to the, to the point where his propagandists got so good that they fear mongered about Russia way too early, right? Like this led
Yeah.
to the Soviet betrayal
Right.
eventually, right? So
Yeah. The counterfactual to the history that we have now is, well, what would have happened had ... And then the questions are, what if the Third Reich would have invaded Poland and stopped? What if
mhm.
they would have done these things and stopped? What if they would have had more, not inhibitions, but they would have regulated their progress with more timing? And the answer always comes back to, things happened at the pace that they did because the Germans were running out of things. They were running out of stuff, material supplies. They were running out of land. They were running out of energy, and they were running out of all the things that they needed to prosecute what would otherwise, you could imagine that, oh, well, once they took the Soviet Union, they could have stopped because they would have access to oil.
Mhm.
Also, let's not give them any credit thinking that they would actually stop. Had they taken the Soviet Union, it's game on
Well, they
until the globe was taken over.
Well, and the Soviet,
Yeah.
I mean, they took Ukraine. They took Ukraine early, and that there was plenty of oil there. So they had the oil already. And like, so we know that they could have, if it was just about the oil, they would have just stopped, right? Like, because Ukraine has plenty. But they didn't.
They couldn't hold it. That was the problem.
Yes.
They were ineffective at utilizing the resource once they got it.
Yeah. So,
all right. So you asked me question number one, which was, you asked me, how did World War II start? And I gave you the invasion of Poland, and we got into the other pieces there that led up to it. All right. No, and then what was your other question on this?
So then because we know how it started, we know how the U.S. got involved. I don't think we really have to rehash this. The Japanese attacked us. We declared war on them, and then we declared war on Germany like 6 days later. It was very quick. Within that week, we were at war with both parties like that.
December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Navy attacked the U.S. fleet in Pearl Harbor. This is on the Isle of Oahu in Hawaii. Yep. And it was a total surprise attack. There's so much interesting history and facts about the entire timeline. If you just focused on what led up to and what happened after with Pearl Harbor, it's all amazing.
Yes.
But we want to put a flag so we can kind of move forward with the conversation. But we want to put a flag on December 7th, 1941, and how the United States had been a material supplier to the Allies in Europe up to that point. So the preceding almost 3 years, we were sending supplies and material and financing Great Britain as they were weathering the Blitz and prosecuting their side of the war.
Taking the brunt of the war. Britain really was the main engine in the Allied fight against the axis of evil for the longest time, to their credit. This truly broke Britain from being a world power to now being a secondary power situation. Yeah. This is the thing that did it. They went from an empire, and to their credit, they probably made up for a lot of their own crimes against humanity with this bulwark that they created. I'll say it. Churchill and them were, and Churchill is a complicated man. He did some fucked up shit, of course. I mean, but yeah, this was definitely a defining moment for the Brits. We took a while to get involved even after we declared war because we weren't ready.
Right.
But we got ready, we got involved, and we beat the Germans first, and then we had to nuke the Japanese.
2 atomic bombs. They were designed and created in the labs at Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford.
Yep.
And so the story of the development and advent of the atomic weapons is unbelievably fascinating. Author Richard Rhodes has written extensively on the history of that, if anyone wants to know more about it.
And there's a movie I haven't seen and won't be able to watch for probably another 30 years until I have 3 hours to kill and don't have kids yelling constantly so I can hear long form dialogue.
Well, what you do is you have to make it into a mini series and watch it in small chunks.
That's how we watch all of our movies. But the really quiet, long ones, I'm like, I'll wait till I'm 55, and I'm like, oh, this Oppenheimer movie's really good. Oh, like I'll just, yeah, I know it's. But anyways, yeah. So they have that movie there. We developed it, and Truman, because FDR died 80 some days after his election. And
his third term in the White House.
This was his
third 4-year term.
This was his third, or no? This was the start of his fourth.
Excuse me. Yeah, the start of his
fourth. The start of his fourth.
He
yes, he had completed three whole terms. Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
he had been in for 3 terms, and this was the start of his fourth. And from the history that I've read, a lot of people knew he was going to die. He thought he was going to die potentially too. And Truman still didn't believe that he was like basically going to be the president at some point during that. But other people were telling him like, hey, they're voting for you as much as they're voting for FDR on this one, right? And a lot of people weren't. They didn't know who the hell Truman was, because who gave a shit about the vice president back then? A lot of times people didn't. It's funny when your president gets really old, people care more about the vice president, right?
I know I'm getting this wrong, and someone who is a presidential historian will absolutely flame me for this, but I think the last time a VP mattered was when Teddy Roosevelt was the VP and McKinley was assassinated.
Ah, yes. Well, no, so
Reagan... I'm misremembering it, I'm sure, but that's what comes up.
66% of the country thought Reagan was too old when he ran for re-election. So VP matters a little bit much with old presidents. And then this last, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the VPs actually matter. These are very old men running for president.
Yeah, totally.
And in fact, when Obama was running for president, because he was the first black president, and the harsh truth in our country was that there was probably a risk of some racist asshole trying to take a shot at him, the VP mattered a little bit then too, which is why he picked one of the most senior and established Democrats he could, who had the most long experience to balance out his inexperience. And he had the whiteness to balance out the blackness that would have bugged the racists. So,
in the context of FDR's re-election for the 4th term, I was referring to the time that in American memory that the VP had mattered, and was consequential. I'm just literally thinking now out loud that there's been more now that have been that have since been consequential. And once again, not only that, the VP is now a consequential figure when you consider the atomic weapons arsenal. Right?
Yeah.
They were much less consequential until we had an atomic weapons arsenal, and now it's majorly consequential.
And they're consequential when you have a split Senate that's so close that you need the VP to break party lines. Yep. So the VP has actually become more significant as of late than they have been. So anyways, Truman famously comes in. There's if you haven't heard this cool little whatever, he gets a call from Eleanor Roosevelt. She says, hey, Roosevelt is dead, and you're the president. And he goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do for you, Eleanor? And she goes, well, you're the one who's in trouble now. Is there anything I can do for you? And she said, you're the one who's in trouble now.
And then he said, I got to let you go. I got to go to the bank.
Yeah.
He had business to attend to that day.
People didn't know where he was. I think they had to get a cab for him. Like he rode a cab to the White House or some shit. Like he literally was in like the middle of nowhere or something. Like, wasn't he in... God,
it's the best example of our federal government being sort of unprepared for the handoff of power in the event that the executive has perished.
This is before Secret Service were
totally
around, like protecting these people, right? He was just a guy who was just in some state, just getting a call, being like, oh shit, I guess I got to come to the White House now. Yeah, people didn't know who Truman was. And Truman is awesome guy. Truman is another man of the people president. He's a poor guy who he had a farm. He was from Missouri, Independence, I believe, Missouri. And he was just a guy. He'd had businesses that had failed. He became a judge So he got into law, he became a judge, and he was known for his honesty. He was always, I mean, it's funny his name was Truman, because he was known as that guy. He became, I think, he lost a judge reelection for some county judge, and then he ran for a higher judgeship later on, easily won it, and then was convinced to go into the Senate, which he did. And while he was in the Senate, World War II had popped off, and one of his famous, no one really knew who he was until he came out with some legislation about wasteful government spending in the military. And so he created some legislation, became the head of that committee essentially, and essentially saved today's dollars around $250 billion in wasteful government spending within the military at the time, which made FDR pay attention, because FDR is like, hey, I like that guy. He's an honest guy right there. And FDR was doing anything he could to find ways for us to save money in the military while expanding our military, right? You didn't want waste.
Right.
When you're trying to have a military engine going, you want that guy who's keeping things honest. So that's why he was picked as his VP running mate for the fourth time.
One of the other little bits of his humble beginnings, and what happens is I get a fun fact in my brain, and then it dislodges from the person. Yeah, the fun fact is that Truman, I'm reading from the Wikipedia page, was raised in Independence, Missouri, and during World War I fought in France as a captain in the field artillery. So he'd been a commissioned officer in one of the front line
a captain in field artillery. Oh my God, Jesus Christ!
So he's in charge of artillery batteries of all these different pieces that are World War I era. So they're a different thing than I fought in when I was an artilleryman.
He was definitely an XO. He liked being an XO. He was that guy. He was. But for our non-military service people, the XO is the officer who's in charge of keeping track of all of the gear in your company, in your unit. And there's other officers actually who track other things, but the XO is a famous one that he'll get on your ass if you lose a pair of nods or ACOG or something, I don't know, whatever. If you lose that, the whole company, the whole base could shut down. So something more mundane, if you lose a couple, I don't know, M4 magazines or some shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for just a moment, I love stopping down and saying this. The structure of the American military is like everything that we ever experienced in our tours is one part brilliant and one part idiotic. And it's the perfect blend that allows us to be effective when we are highly effective.
Hey, I mean, if you talk to Sarah MC Payne or any of these military academy people or wartime people who study war, the reason the U.S. is the global superpower, and when it comes to military, unmatched, is because of logistics. The most boring thing you could ever think of. When you start saying logistics, I know people's eyes glaze over and they're like, oh God, logistics, because it's about as boring as bureaucracy sounds. But legitimately, logistics is what wins fucking wars. It's why we have Gerald S. Ford class carriers going out everywhere. All right. It's so that we could literally, the Russian army is a perfect example of what lack of logistics will get you. From February 2022, when they're staging a military training operation outside of in Belarus, and they didn't have enough logistics for oil. They didn't have food. They didn't bring food, because they said, they'll get it from all the villages that they take. There will be no military resistance whatsoever. That's what they were told. Like, you would get oil on the way. Oh, don't worry, you'll just capture some oil, some villages, and you'll refuel on the way.
And because of the way they're structured, there was not one non-commissioned officer who could raise his hand and say, do we have a plan B in case that doesn't work?
Non-commissioned officer? There's only meat here. Shut up, meat. Get to the front line. We laugh. I'm sorry for the meat out there. That's really tragic, but it's the only way I can joke around about this shit. So, yeah. Anyways, logistics.
We can reflect back on that experience and see why when you're there, a lot of things just don't make sense, and they're frustrating, and they stop you at every turn, and it just feels like you're just there's just no way that this organization can do anything meaningful. But it turns out that because there's an XO there, you have someone who really is overseeing logistics and the material of the unit, and that is the executive officer is not the identical thing to a vice president. But should the commander be taken out in as a casualty in battle, you have someone to immediately step into their place,
Yeah.
and that keeps the integrity of the unit together. And we have historical examples of where the a significant portion of the senior officers and non-commissioned officers were destroyed in a battle, and you get these amazing stories like Audie Murphy.
Yeah.
Right? You get
Absolutely.
someone who is promoted from, what was he, a PFC or a corporal, to these field grade promotions until he's now a commissioned officer in World War II. And so, yeah, there's a we're talking about President Truman and his rise from being pretty humble beginnings in the Midwest to
Yeah.
being someone with experience in World War One, which is defining to these people at this time. This is huge because the people that are making strategic decisions in World War II have experience from the front lines in World War One. Hitler
Yeah.
did. He
Yeah.
was making awful decisions on his country, but he did have that experience. And our senior military and executive leadership did as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are interesting times. So we arrived at the point where we acknowledged that the U.S. entered the war in 1941
Yep.
as a consequence of being surprise attacked by Japan, and ended the war in 1945 as a consequence of a couple of significant operations in Europe. D-Day comes to mind,
Yep.
June 6, 1944. And then later, I never remember the exact days of the two different bombings.
They're like a couple days apart from each other.
They're in August of 1945.
Yeah. So I
Japan
think
was being
3
firebombed.
days. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that. And I can bring it up here since I have Wikipedia. So Japan was being firebombed relentlessly all through the end of 1944 and 1945. And the Air Force was just burning cities to the ground.
Yeah.
And so what's one of these really, it's interesting / tragic fun facts about the atomic weapons was what they were looking for was something that would be a more economic way to burn cities to the ground. No one really understood what the impact of atomic discharge was going to be
Yeah.
as these bombs were put into use. It was the first opportunity to really see, well, how these things would play out in strategic use.
Yeah.
And that's the story. I mean, everything that follows is our now understanding of the nightmare that atomic weapons and later the thermoatomic weapons would be.
Yeah. The hydrogen bomb was way bigger bomb than the ones that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This issue is still debated. It's really our only instance in history of nuking people, of people being of this weapon being used on people. I've heard strong arguments on both sides for it ending the war and potentially stopping the Japanese from like another 9 to 15 million people starving afterwards. We were able to start getting Japan fed, because by then Japan had been completely isolated for so long by most of the world. Millions of people were dying of starvation, like millions of people, and millions more were going to continue to die if they didn't stop the war. And Truman thought, well, we dropped the first one, this will be it. And they were pretty surprised that he had to drop the second one. To his benefit, Truman...
August 6th and August 9th. August 6th.
So yeah, 3 days apart.
Yep.
Now, people would like to say that Truman was, that he was the guy of nukes, but he actually was the one who pushed back against MacArthur a famous wartime general during the Korean War who wanted to
Yeah.
nuke the Chinese at the time. And instead, and Truman ended his presidency, his 8-year presidency, as one of the most unpopular presidents in history to this day, even more so
Yeah.
than Trump. But at the time, but now he's regarded as one of the sixth best presidents, one of the top 5 of all time. And it's for things like this where McCarthy wanted to nuke the Chinese. A lot of people were pushing for this to end the Korean stalemate that he saw. And Truman said, no, he's like, a World War II was ended by nuclear bombs. World War III will start through nuclear weapons. Now, we don't have a crystal ball, but we got a Cold War instead. And I would argue he was probably pretty on the nose. So he's looked at now as a very wise man and somebody who he was thought of as a coward for not nuking China at the time. The generals were saying, "Oh, we have the weaponry, we should be using it." And now he's looked at as very brave and not cowardly for not only standing up and saying no, but actually firing a hero general that people thought it was a very unpopular decision to fire MacArthur, and he did anyways. Truman was a pretty phenomenal president overall, I would say, as far as what he was able to accomplish. And he also was the father of one of the highest tax codes in American history. I see that we're at the tail end of this, but NATO started under Truman, the UN started under Truman, and the Marshall Plan happened under Truman. All of these things were able to happen. This is how globalization really started after World War II. It was under his presidency. And that's why that's why I keep talking about him, is he's so important to what we know of as the modern world that we live in now. Much of that is a product of when he was president. Not saying he did all of this, but that this happened under his administration, these things. So,
and part of the reason so we're leaning into its importance historically because it's a reality to our time, and we're leaning into its importance strategically because of how certainly we have this great way to look back. Our vision is totally clear about what happened in this mid-century period and post-war period, and what had to take place in order for another. It turns out that World War I just got a 20-year break, almost to the day. For World War II, it just was a recapitulation of what had failed to be done properly in World War I. And even though they may not have had that exact perspective of what was going on, what world leaders knew at that point was now they had just lived through 2 of the worst wars in human history, and they would do anything to prevent another one from coming to pass in their time. Korea is a forgotten conflict in our history because it came so early. It happened so quickly after World War II. It was sort of historically overshadowed. It was about 4 years long.
Yeah.
And there was a lot done to keep it quiet.
I was about to say, we did our best effort to not call it a war, not talk about it. While it was happening, no one wanted to talk about it. After it happened, no one wanted to talk about it. We really wanted to forget about this shit.
And the men who the American citizens, because there were men and women both involved in this war. The extent to which women participated is oftentimes downplayed in our historical narrative of these wars. But at risk of starting an entire topic on the Korean War and what ultimately came from it, it is all a part of how we were now negotiating this new world order that really was only just a few hours old when Korea started. This new world order, there were buildings that were being created for the United Nations that were still under construction, right? There were things that were not baked into the pie yet, and this new conflict starts. So yeah, we're at a good point to stop, because That tax code is some juicy information to talk about next time we convene.
I think,
And
yeah,
of
we'll jump
course,
right into
the
these
Bretton
topics
Woods
right here.
conversation.
Bretton Woods, Marshall Plan, and Korea, I
Yeah.
think, are a great part 2 to this little. I mean, we're on. So this is globalization part. So, okay, before we end the episode, this is tough. The last episode, episode 27, it goes out tomorrow morning. I have to label it. I have to call it something. Right now, it's called DOE and labor. But we talk about, I don't even know if we talk enough about globalization to classify it under the globalization thing. But the tail end, the last 15 minutes, if you remember, we talk a lot about the rise of labor unions and what was happening there.
Yeah.
So do we include it in the globalization part series, or does it just go into one of our other categories for now? What do you think?
I think it's supplemental to the overall conversation, but not an official part.
Not an official part.
It's how do they do that? It's a narrative off to the side that supports everything else we're talking about.
Okay, so maybe I'll put globalization instead of part whatever. I'll put supplemental material instead.
Yeah, there you go. That's it.
All right, cool. Well, then this will be globalization part 8, World War II. Really, kind of just there we go. All right. Well, I think I have time for another episode, so let's go ahead and call it good here and see if we can pop into another one. It was great chatting with you.
Excellent. Right on, man. It's good to see you. I had things going on last weekend. We had to take a week break, but
I know.
We're back at it.
I love it. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Right on, dude. Bye-bye.
Bye.